You are sitting at your kitchen table during tax season, staring at a W-2 form and realizing that the government just took a massive bite out of your year. You worked late nights and missed weekends and dealt with stress for 12 months, only to find out that for 3 or 4 of those months, you were essentially working for free just to pay Uncle Sam. You probably feel a mix of frustration and resignation, because you have been told your whole life that paying taxes is just the price of living in a civilized society. But then you open your phone and see a headline about a billionaire paying a tax rate that is actually lower than what you pay. You see tech moguls and real estate tycoons living lavish lifestyles while reporting almost zero income to the IRS. It feels unfair. It feels like the system is rigged. And here is the uncomfortable truth that nobody wants to admit. The system is rigged, but not in the way you think. It isn't rigged because they are breaking the laws. It is rigged because they are playing a completely different game with a completely different rulebook than the one you were taught in school. Most people think the path to wealth is to work hard to earn a high salary and then save what is left after taxes. But the wealthy know that earned income is the most heavily taxed money on the planet. They know that trying to get rich through a salary is like trying to run a marathon while wearing a backpack full of bricks. Today, we are going to break down the exact mechanism the top 1% use to opt out of the tax system entirely.
It is a strategy called buy, borrow, die. By the end of this video, you are going to understand why your high salary might actually be a trap and how you can start applying these billionaire strategies even if you don't have $1 billion yet. We are going to deconstruct the 3 phases of this strategy and show you how to move from being a tax victim to a tax strategist. To understand why the rich don't pay taxes, you first have to understand the fundamental difference between how you get paid and how they get paid. When you earn a salary, that money is taxed immediately before it even hits your bank account. The federal government takes a cut, the state government takes a cut, and Social Security takes a cut. You are left with what remains to pay your bills and try to build a life. This is what financial experts call the W-2 trap. You are trading your time for money, and that money is being taxed at the highest possible rates. Wealthy people do not trade time for money. They trade money for assets. And this brings us to the first phase of the strategy, which is buy. The wealthy do not focus on income. They focus on net worth. They take their capital and they buy appreciating assets like stocks, real estate, or businesses. Here is the critical distinction that most people miss. When you buy a stock or a piece of real estate and it goes up in value, you do not owe a single penny in taxes on that growth until you actually sell it. This is called an unrealized gain. If you buy a share of Amazon for $100 and it goes up to $1,000, you have made $900 in paper.
The IRS cannot touch that $900. It sits there compounding and growing year after year, completely tax-free. This is why you see headlines about billionaires whose net worth jumped by $10 billion in a single year, yet they paid zero income tax. It is because that wealth is locked inside assets, not sitting in a checking account as cash. The wealthy understand that the moment you sell an asset, you trigger a taxable event, so they simply never sell. They let the snowball roll and grow bigger and bigger. But this leads to a very obvious question that probably has you scratching your head right now. If all their money is tied up in stocks and buildings and they never sell anything, how do they actually pay for their lifestyle? How do they buy the yachts and the mansions and the groceries? If their wealth is just numbers on a screen, this is where we enter the second and most genius phase of the strategy, which is borrow. This is the part that rewires your brain. Because we have been taught that debt is bad. We have been taught that debt is slavery. But for the wealthy, debt is not a burden. It is a tool. It is a tax-free way to access their wealth. Instead of selling their stock to get cash, which would trigger a massive tax bill, they go to the bank and they ask for a loan using their assets as collateral.
This is often called a securities-backed line of credit. The bank looks at their $10 million portfolio and says, sure, we will lend you $5 million cash at a very low interest rate because we know you have the assets to back it up.
Now, here is the magic trick. Loan proceeds are not taxable income. When the bank wires that $5 million sent to their account, the IRS sees zero income. That is $5 million of spending power that is completely tax-free. They can use that money to live a lifestyle that you can only dream of. And on paper, they look like they have no income at all. But you might be thinking, what about the interest? Don't they have to pay interest on that loan? Yes, they do. But the math is overwhelmingly in their favor. Let's say they pay 3% or 4% interest on the loan, but their investment portfolio continues to grow 8% or 10% a year. They are making a profit on the borrowed money. They are using the bank's money to live while their own money stays invested and continues to compound. This is called positive arbitrage. They are essentially getting paid to borrow money to live their life. Compare that to your situation, where you sell your labor, pay 30% or 40% in taxes, and then try to invest what is left. They are skipping the tax step entirely and keeping their wealth working for them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. This brings us to the third and final phase of the strategy, which is die. Now, I know that sounds morbid, but estate planning is where the ultimate tax loophole exists. You might be wondering what happens to all that debt they accumulated. If they keep borrowing and borrowing, won't the bill eventually come due? Well, yes and no. When the wealthy individual passes away, their heirs inherit the assets. And under current tax law, something incredible happens called the step-up in basis. This is the holy grail of tax avoidance. Let me explain how this works with a simple example. Let's say your grandmother bought some stock 50 years ago for $10 a share. Today, that stock is worth $500 a share. If she had sold it the day before she died, she would have had to pay capital gains tax on that $490 profit. But when she dies and leaves it to you, the cost basis of that stock is reset to the current market value. The IRS treats it as if you bought it for $500. All that capital gains tax liability that built up over 50 years just evaporates. It disappears into thin air. You can sell that stock the next day for $500 and pay zero capital gains tax. So here's how the cycle closes. The heirs inherit the assets tax-free, thanks to the step-up in basis. They sell a small portion of those assets to pay off the loans that were taken out to fund the lifestyle. Because the basis was stepped up, they pay no tax on that sale. The debt is wiped clean, and the family keeps the vast majority of the wealth, ready to start the cycle all over again. Buy assets, borrow against them to live, and die to wipe out the tax bill. It is a perpetual motion machine of wealth creation that completely bypasses the tax system that you and I are forced to participate in. This explains why wealth inequality is exploding. It explains why the middle class feels like they are running on a hamster wheel, while the rich seem to be taking an elevator to the top. The tax code was written by the wealthy for the wealthy. It rewards capital and it penalizes labor. If you work for money, you lose. If your money works for you, you win. It is that simple. And getting angry about it won't change your bank account. What will change your bank account is understanding these rules and figuring out how to apply them to your own life, even if you aren't a billionaire. Now, you might be thinking that this sounds great for Jeff Bezos, but I can't walk into Chase Bank and ask for $1 million loan against my savings account. And you are right. You probably can't do it at that scale yet. But the principles of buy, borrow, die can be applied by anyone who shifts their mindset from consumer to investor. The first step is to stop prioritizing paying off low-interest debt and start prioritizing accumulating appreciating assets. Most people are obsessed with being debt-free. They take every extra dollar they earn and they throw it at their mortgage or their low-interest car loan. They think this is the path to freedom. But by doing that, they are trapping their equity in an asset that they can't eat and can't spend.
they are killing their liquidity. The wealthy person would never pay off a 3% mortgage early. They would take that extra cash and buy more assets. They would put it into an index fund or a rental property. They want their money growing at 8% or 10%, not saving 3%. They understand the concept of opportunity cost.
Every dollar you use to pay down cheap debt is a dollar that is not out there working for you in the market. Let's look at homeownership through this lens. For the average American, their home is their biggest asset. But most people treat it like a piggy bank that they are trying to fill up. The smart strategy is to treat it like a bank that you can borrow from. As your home increases in value, you can use a home equity line of credit, or HOLOC, to access that cash tax-free without selling the house. You can then use that borrowed money to buy another rental property or to fund a business venture. You are borrowing against your asset to buy more assets. You are creating your own mini version of the buy, borrow, die strategy. You are using debt to expand your wealth rather than using your income to pay off debt. This requires a massive psychological shift. You have to stop being afraid of debt and start respecting it as a tool. There is good debt and there is bad debt. Bad debt is borrowing money to buy things that go down in value, like cars or clothes or vacations. That is consumer debt, and it will keep you poor forever. Good debt is borrowing money to buy assets that go up in value or generate income. Good debt makes you rich. The wealthy have almost no consumer debt, but they have massive amounts of investment debt. They are leveraged. They control huge amounts of assets with relatively little of their own cash. Another way to apply this is through your investment portfolio. If you have a taxable brokerage account, you can apply for margin privileges. This allows you to borrow against the value of your stocks. Now, this comes with risks, and you have to be careful about margin calls, where the bank forces you to sell if the market drops. But used conservatively, it is a way to access liquidity without triggering taxes. Instead of selling stocks to pay for a down payment on a house or to cover an emergency, you can borrow against your portfolio. You keep your stocks, you keep your growth, and you avoid the capital gains tax. The trap that most people fall into is the trap of liquidity. They keep their money in cash because they want to be able to get to it. But cash is a terrible asset. It loses value to inflation every single year. The wealthy hold almost no cash. They hold assets. And because they understand how to borrow against those assets, they have plenty of liquidity without holding cash. They have realized that in a modern financial system, access to credit is just as good as having cash in the bank, but it allows your net worth to grow much faster. This brings us to the concept of phantom income versus phantom debt. When you work a job, you have real income and real taxes. But when you own assets, you have phantom income, which is appreciation that you don't pay taxes on. The wealthy maximize phantom income. On the flip side, most middle-class people have phantom debt. They have liabilities like car leases and subscriptions that drain their wealth but don't show up on a balance sheet as traditional debt. You need to flip this equation. You want to accumulate assets
that generate invisible, tax-free growth and eliminate the lifestyle liabilities that drain your cash flow. We also need to talk about the role of inflation in this strategy. The buy, borrow, die strategy is actually a massive bet against the currency. When you borrow money, you are shorting the dollar. You are borrowing dollars today that are worth a certain amount, and you are paying them back years later with dollars that are worth less due to inflation. If inflation is 3% a year, and your loan interest rate is 3% a year, the real cost of that loan is zero. You are getting free money. The wealthy use inflation to erode the value of their debts, while their assets rise in price with inflation. They are winning on both sides of the equation. The middle-class saver is losing on both sides. Their cash savings are being eaten by inflation, and they aren't carrying the kind of good debt that gets cheaper over time. They are swimming upstream, while the wealthy are floating downstream. You have to stop trying to save your way to wealth. You cannot save your way to wealth in a fiat currency system that is designed to inflate. You have to invest your way to wealth. and you have to use leverage to amplify those returns. Now, I know this sounds risky, and it is risky if you don't know what you're doing. Leverage cuts both ways. If you borrow money to buy assets, and those assets drop in value, you can get wiped out. This is why the wealthy also focus heavily on risk management. They diversify, they have cash reserves, they don't over-leverage. They use debt strategically, not recklessly. You need to build a solid foundation before you start layering on leverage. You need that emergency fund. You need that steady income stream. But once you have the foundation, you have to stop playing it safe and start playing it smart. One of the most practical steps you can take immediately is to look at your retirement accounts. While 401ks and IRAs are great, they have limitations. You can't easily borrow against them. The wealthy often build massive taxable brokerage accounts specifically because of the flexibility they offer. A taxable account allows you to use the buy, borrow, die strategy much more effectively than a retirement account, where the government sets all the rules. If you are maxing out your 401k but have zero liquidity in a brokerage account, you might be locking yourself into a rigid system that limits your options. Think about the concept of the tax drag. Every time you pay tax, you are losing part of your compounding engine. If you lose 30% of your gains to taxes every year over 40 years, that doesn't just reduce your wealth by 30%. It can reduce your final net worth by 50 or 60% because of the loss compounding on that tax money. The buy, borrow, die strategy is ultimately about eliminating tax drag. It is about keeping 100% of your capital working for you 100% of the time. It is the most efficient way to build wealth that exists. You have to change your identity. You have to stop seeing yourself as a worker and start seeing yourself as a capital allocator. A worker tries to increase their salary. A capital allocator tries to increase their assets. A worker tries to pay off debt. A capital allocator tries to manage debt. A worker is afraid of the IRS. A capital allocator uses the tax code as a roadmap. The system isn't going to change. The government isn't going to fix this for you. If you wait for the laws to become fair, you will be waiting forever. You have to learn the rules of the game as it is played right now and play it to win. The beauty of this is that it doesn't require you to be a genius. It requires you to be disciplined, and it requires you to be patient. It takes time to build the asset base required to make this work. You won't be able to borrow against your portfolio tomorrow if you have $500 in it. But if you spend the next 10 years aggressively buying assets instead of buying liabilities, you will eventually reach a crossover point. You will reach a point where your assets can support your lifestyle. And when you reach that point, you never have to sell. You never have to pay the tax man. You have achieved true financial freedom. Don't let the fear of debt keep you poor. Don't let the obsession with income blind you to the power of assets. Start small. Buy your first index fund. Buy your first rental property. Keep buying. Never sell. And when you need cash, learn how to access it without triggering a tax bill. This is the blueprint. This is how the dynastic families have kept their wealth for generations. It is not a secret. It is just math. And now that you know the math, you have no excuse to keep playing the game the old way. Your future self is counting on you to stop working for money and start making money work for you. The tax code is a series of incentives. If you do what the government wants, which is invest and build businesses, you get rewarded. If you do what the government doesn't prioritize, which is just working a job, you get taxed. Align your financial behavior with the incentives of the system. Stop trying to swim upstream. Build your arc of assets and let the current of compound interest carry you to wealth.